We're going to talk about complex numbers. Let's start with radical -1. Well, you know that radical 4 is 2 because 4 is 2 times 2. And you need 2 of the same number to come out of square root. That's why you get 2. However, when you have a square root of -1, it doesn't work. And also when you use your calculator, you'll find out that it's going to give you error. So square root of -1 is not a real number. So we call this I, meaning it's imaginary. So radical -1 is I. That means, what is square root of -9? Well, square root of -9 is going to be radical -1 times radical 9, which is going to be 3i. What about square root of -100? That's going to be radical -1 times radical 100, which is 10i. And a complex number is real plus imaginary. So, for example, 5 plus 3i is a complex number. It's real plus 3i, imaginary. Also, -3 minus I is an example of a complex number. What about just I itself? Yes, it's not only imaginary, but it's complex because you could say this is 0 plus I. So how to simplify -7 radical -12? Well, you already have -7 outside. And you know that it's going to be radical -1 times radical 12. Well, you know that that becomes I. What's radical 12? Radical 12 you could simplify by saying that it's 4 times 3, and 2 will come out. So radical 12 is 2 radical 3, but you have 7 in front of it. So 7 times 2 will be, so it will be -2 times 2, which is -14, I radical 3. How do you add or subtract two complex numbers? You got 13 plus 4i minus quantity, 8 plus 4i. It's like, think about adding like terms. So we have 13 plus 4i. We need to distribute the negative. And then just add up the like terms. 13 minus 8, which is 5. 4i minus 4i, that cancels out. So your final answer is 5. What about when you have 16 minus quantity, 13 plus 6i plus 8i? Well, let's distribute the negative first. And then add up the like terms. You will get 3 plus 2i. Now here we have a multiplication. So let's distribute here. 15i times -1 is -15i. And 15i times 2i is positive 30i squared. Now what is I squared? Well, I squared is I times I, isn't it? And what is I? That's radical -1 times radical -1, which is -1. So I squared is -1. It's good to remember this because we're going to use this a lot. So you're going to end up getting -15i minus 30. Let's do this example. Well, it looks like you have to FOIL. So let's do 4 times 3 plus 2i minus 12i times 3 plus 2i. Let's distribute, you get 12 plus 8i minus 36i minus 24i squared. Well, you're going to get 12 minus 28i. And then, again, I squared is negative 1. So negative times negative is positive. And you got 12 and 24, which is going to be 36 minus 28i. So that's how you multiply complex numbers. So I is radical negative 1. What about I squared? I squared is negative 1. I cubed is I times I squared, which is negative 1 times radical negative 1. That's going to be negative I. What about I to the 4? I to the 4 is I squared times I squared, which is going to be positive 1. I to the 5th is going to be I times I to the 4, which is going to be 1 times I, which is I. What about I to the 6? That's I squared times I to the 4, which is going to be I squared, which is negative 1. And I to the 7 is going to be I cubed times I to the 4, which is going to be negative I. And I to the 8 is the same thing as I to the 4 times I to the 4, which will be 1 times 1, 1. Notice, this pattern repeats. These numbers repeat. I, negative 1, negative I, 1. It will repeat. So you know what I to the 9 will be. It's going to be I. I to the 10th, negative 1, and so forth. Now, is there any shortcut? Like, for example, let's say we want to find I to the 100. Do we want to keep finding until we get up to I to 100? It's going to take too much time. So here's a shortcut. You divide 100 by 4 because the pattern repeats every 4 terms. And notice, do you have any remainder? You don't have any remainder. Remainder is 0. If the remainder is 0, it's going to be the same thing as I to the 4. Okay, because think about it. You could rewrite this as I to the 4 to the 25th power, which is 1 times 1 to the 25th, which is 1. So if the remainder is 0, it's going to be the same thing as I to the 4. If the remainder is 3, if 1, it's going to be the same thing as I. If the remainder is 2, it's going to be the same thing as I squared. If the remainder is 3, it's going to be the same thing as I cubed. So for example, if you have I to the 50th power, what's 50 divided by 4? Remainder is 2. So I to the 50th power is the same thing as I squared, which is going to be negative 1.